So for this particular session, we have with us Mr. Anthony Miranti Jr. with a top title, Conversations with the Past, Fun Ways to Use Sound to Conserve and Expand Cultural Influence. So a little bit about Mr. Anthony. So Anthony is a lecturer with the Faculty of Creative Industry, FCI, at Universiti Tunku Abdul Rahman, UTAR campus, where he teaches various audio and broadcasting courses. He's passionate about history, especially about story of how people from different places and spaces are interconnected via material objects and machines like trains, ships, cars, and radio. His area of specialization and research interest includes the exploration of the various capacities of sound as a media to capture historical information, preserve cultural heritage, and also combine cultural identifiers with contemporary influence. So again, attendees, another reminder, if you have any question, we have a Q&A session at the end of Mr. Anthony's talk. So if you have any burning question, please drop your question by clicking on the Q&A box rather than dropping it in the chat box. Okay, short introduction, a lot of things to be shared. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, Mr. Anthony Miranti.
Hi. All right. Well, thank you very much. I'd like to thank the organizing committee for letting me join today for my talk. Yeah, this is a great opportunity for me. And to be honest, I was a little bit nervous because usually coming into situations like this, so much of the emphasis is actually on the value of the image and how how imagery works, what people are into or what they can see. But the thing with sound is that like it's another means of connecting with people. And in this particular instance, I think like the previous speakers have actually set me up very well because they have expressed the importance of looking into different aspects of the research that they have done in order to create the imagery that they have. And aspects of that have included, as with Ejik Hafiz's talk, the history of the environment that we're in. And so part of that history that that is hard to capture sometimes are the sounds of the environment, the actual stories from the people that have experienced it, which adds to the emotional impact of what we can appreciate from the time that they were in and how close it actually links us to our own. So I'm going to get started on my slides. Sound. It'd be ironic to forget to share with sound given the nature of my topic. All right, so.
That'd be ironic.
Indeed. All right. So the topic, conversations with the past, comes partly from a lot of my own experiences and the experiences that I've led some of our students on in terms of how to develop skills in audio recording and in narrative and storytelling. And some of the aspects of what we do, like the basis of what we do, a lot of people believe that like when we are teaching our students, it's actually about the technical aspects, learning how to use the camera, learning how to use the microphone, how to develop the best technical skill in developing an image or a story. But the thing is that this is only part of it. You can have the most technically excellent execution of something, but if it does not emotionally connect with people listening to it, they will turn it off and you will lose your audience. So the way to keep people involved is to maintain that emotional connection. So the way that we've looked at it is to like find ways to to actually find the emotional connection that you have as the individual and that your audience would have to the material that you're presenting to them. So for the context of what we're talking about today, the conversations for the past, there are some reasons why people wouldn't necessarily embark on these things. Part of the problem becomes that there is this sense of not being adequate for some people, that they don't have the skill set required to get an audio recording. They try to take an audio recording, it sounds really loud, they can't understand anything, they give up. Others may feel like they want to try to do justice to their family history, but because they are not a trained historian and do not know how to do research, then this may create an issue for them. So, like, what I want to do is kind of look at some of the aspects of what goes into a project where you're looking at how to kind of preserve history, either on a personal level or on a family level or on a societal level. And the first question is, what is a historian exactly? Like, what is what is the type of person that actually does this type of work, where they actually try to save? How do they research what has happened in the past? So there's a lot of different ways to determine a historian. There are certifications. You can go to University Malaya and get a degree in art history. We teach art history courses in UTAR. So does that mean that it is a certified thing? The answer is no. Being a historian is somebody that is actually doing research to record the past. And that doesn't require a certification, it requires action. It requires the interest in doing it, and it requires the ability to look beyond your own perspective, to find details in areas, to expand on the knowledge of something, and not to simply find enough and then stop. Because the nature of history is that it does intertwine. These events that we study, when we memorize dates, for example, August 31st, 1957, there is a lot of background to that. It's important to remember what date independence occurred on, but it did not happen in a vacuum. There was a lot of lead up to that. There was a lot of effort. There was a lot of sacrifice that led up to those moments. There was a lot of trauma that that created the conditions that led to independence being a necessity. So, what are the emotional states that people are in? That we're in. The people that were experiencing it were forming these memories at the time. They had a very different perspective. So it's going to be in the stories that they tell, these emotions are what's going to come out. And on a personal level, it's going to be much more interesting when you're speaking to somebody, such as a grandparent, and the grandparent has been a certain way with you. They have had a relationship with you as a grandparent and grandchild. But when you are talking to them about the time when they were your age, they're going to be going back to that point in their mind where they were your peer more than they were your grandparent. And you're going to be finding the actual state of mind that they were at. In the future, your own kids or grandkids are going to be asking you, Grandma, what was it like living in 2020? And you're going to flash back to a whole bunch of things that are going to come up. And you're going to have those emotional flashbacks, and you're going to be communicating that to them. It's going to be the same for them as it was for myself talking to my grandparents about what was the Great Depression like, what was World War II like. And it may not be individual dates. You're not going to register an individual dates, but they'll remember the feelings. They'll remember being hungry. They'll remember being cold or scared. And they will describe those situations. Okay. So another question is, when we talk about incorporating sound and what we are able to try to preserve, or what we're trying to attain from our history and from our culture, it kind of helps to understand a bit about what we mean when we say what culture actually is. Now, my father-in-law is a former professor at UKM, a professor of anthropology. And so, like this week, I just asked him, "Hey, I'm going to be giving this lecture on this topic. So, if I were to ask you in one sentence what culture is, what would you call it?" And as an anthropologist, he said, "Culture is a roadmap followed by a group of people under certain circumstances." So, To his mind, as an anthropologist, what culture represents is that there's a group of people that are agreeing to a situation that they're in. And in that sense, like that is what a culture is. Malaysian culture is this group of people that are bound by variations of language, the common stories that we have, the greater community that we're in, the values that we abide by, the arts that we share, the different techniques and skills that we use to build things and that we use to maintain our structure in society, okay, traditions and rituals, and they are intermixed and they are different and there are subcultures. Even this group that we're with now is a subculture where we are speaking to each other. There is a certain hierarchy that we have. There's an understanding that I am, as the person that's holding this talk, that I'm the one that's kind of has all attention on him. The other people in the audience are there in the position of hopefully learning something. There's an expectation that I will provide you with some knowledge or some takeaway from this in exchange for the time you've given. Okay. So within all of that, we have a subculture going on, and that culture shifts. Just now, Enchik Hafiz was the one that was at the front, and I was the one in the audience expecting something in return for my time. So the culture like in the environment that we talk about is there's is composed of these different aspects, these different values and expectations, and it is fluid. Okay, there are constant evolutions that are going on. So culture in itself, being that roadmap, it's a constant progress that we're going through. So the idea that we should like conserve, that we should that culture is being destroyed is not 100% accurate. Culture is evolving, okay? And this is a common theme that comes up as well throughout history, that there are evolutions that we as individuals, we as cultures, we as societies have to take. And by using the knowledge of the past, by taking advantage of the opportunities we have with our elders and with the cultural arts that may be declining, then we are able to uh, help to conserve those things, help to expand them, and help them to evolve, as Tintoy has done with the Wayan Kulits. Now, another thing that we deal with, that we will want to kind of explore, is the concept of what creativity is. Because there is, like there is like the dictionary definition of creativity, which is essentially to invent something from nothing, the act of actually creating, of bringing something into being that did not exist before. Okay, there's also a more cynical definition of creativity, which is cleverly, uh, sorry, cleverly um, disguised plagiarism. Okay, so the thing is that there is some truth to both. There are art forms that do combine existing ones, fusion type of art forms that can combine existing arts or existing ideas and put them together into new and exciting ways. It is the best combination of the new and the familiar, okay, which triggers many good feelings for many of us, okay? Um, there's also the sort of raw creativity that you may experience. For example, modern art. When Jackson Pollock came out and was splashing paint on things, like many people did not know how to deal with that. In the same way, different types of sound can be used. There's certain works by our own professor, Ray Lagenblock. Sorry, I messed up your name, sir. But Professor Ray has done a lot of work that actually incorporates sound into his presentation. And the disruptive nature of that is a unique way of using sound as a means of communicating the ideals. So creativity is the fact that like There will be critics that are saying that something that is not 100% creative, that is not 100% new, does not actually count as creativity. But there is also, that does not devalue the act of creating using other ideas and bringing them new life and bringing them into a new way of using it. All right. So, what does any of that have to do with sound, and why is sound even something that we would want to spend this much time on, okay, in a creative setting? Well, the reason is that, like, as I mentioned earlier, sound actually has a very deep emotional resonance with people. If you watch a film without the sound on, you watch a horror film without the sound on, there's almost no horror impact that you're going to experience. If you watch an action film without the sound, then you lose a lot of the excitement from explosions, for example. Okay. Um, the emotional impact is really what we retain more than anything else. When I started lecturing, somebody actually told me that when you lecture, Anthony, people are going to retain 60% of the image they see, 30% of the text that you put on the board, and 10% of what you say, which I found very terrifying as a lecturer. It's like, oh my God, then why am I even talking? So why am I even here? But the reason is because it all acts to reinforce each other. And because, again, the sound is going to reinforce an emotional connection, especially when it comes to narratives that are important to us. It is one thing to read, for example, about my uncle, my great uncle, Clyde, who earned a Medal of Honor in World War II. And in the statement, it says that he like single-handedly blew up a Panzer tank and took out half of the platoon. And it doesn't, when he would talk about it, which was very rare, he never went into detail, but the only thing that he ever said to me about it was that the the point that he had at the time, he wasn't out there to blow up a tank and kill Germans. He only was worried about his men in the machine. The story that he told me was that transferred from the text gave the emotional impact of he didn't think he got the medal for the right reason. He was never proud of the reason that they awarded him the medal for, but he was proud of himself for having the courage to go back and rescue his men. That was what was impactful to him. That was lost in the text that we often find when we're reading. So sound also is impactful when we talk about it from a cultural or artistic point of view, because then we're discussing the sounds that actually directly drill into that emotional core of ourselves. Otherwise, why would we listen to music? Why would the music industry be multi-billion dollars for the last 70 years? The reason is that these are the songs and the sounds that we really are attached to. We are emotionally driven to come to these sounds, to like interact with them. So sound has a huge amount of emotional impact to us, and therefore provides us with a lot of connectivity to our own culture, our own society, our own past, and our own family. Okay, so how, now that we have a bit of an idea of like what some of our goals might be, or so, like how we can like kind of view the actions that we want to take, we may be motivated now to actually try to capture a little bit of this before it goes away. There is a lot of value in actually just getting perspectives from your own family. Um, the the I have two sides to my family. My dad's side, the Mirantis, my mom's side, the Baileys. And on the my dad's side, when I was about 20 years old, they proposed to me that since I was taking communication arts, radio, TV, film, I could actually do a video history project for the family. And I did that. And I got beautiful stories from the Miranti side of the family. Unfortunately for the Bailey side, I didn't get those stories. I didn't capture those. So there was a lot of things that were lost at that point. So I lost a lot of stories about the background of certain family events. There's, for example, there was a letter that we found when I was with my cousin. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, but it is a American terrorist organization that is essentially white supremacist. However, like my cousin and I, at one point going through a relative's house, found a letter from the KKK effectively threatening my grandparents and my mom. So, like, this was a story like when you're 9 and your older cousin says, "You don't talk about this to anybody, you don't talk about it." But when I got older and remembered that, then the people that I wanted to talk to about it no longer with us. It created problems. So, like, I'm not able to get the stories behind it, and I lost that opportunity. So I would encourage you to use this opportunity to get the historical perspectives from your family members. Okay. So what I like to do is, because I always have my handphone, which is what most of us have, whenever my father-in-law, for example, starts to talk, I just get everything else cleared off so my phone will work. Like, use the voice memo function, whatever recording function's available, okay, and start to record what's being said. So, for example, this is part of a story that he was telling regarding like early days of like when he came back from Malaysia after getting his first degree and traveling, and what it was like traveling on the roads then and what occurs when your car breaks down. Okay, so I mean, comparative situation for us. If we have a car breakdown, we have AAA, or we have the insurance company, we have our hand phone. It's a very different perspective from 60 years before, where it's only through the sheer luck of breaking down in front of a chieftain's house that the chieftain was then, because of that previous connection, willing to talk to the mechanic and get him to stay open long enough to fix the car and send my father-in-law on his way. Otherwise, very different story than would have happened, very different set of conveniences than what we have today. So there's a lot of backdrop and background there that is both historical to the society that has evolved since then, as well as to your personal family history. Okay. So this is like a very rich opportunity for people to gain a background knowledge of what's going on and to develop a connectivity with what has been built up since then and an appreciation for what we are able to have now. Another way of utilizing sound is actually through directly engaging the past, not just taking the opportunity of recordings, but to actually set up situations to discuss with people. There is the concept of the human library, which is like there are examples here, where essentially it is somebody with an experience that they're happy to tell. They hang out at the library or the community center, and you can effectively go and check these people out like a book. And they will sit there with you, and they will tell you the stories that that they volunteered to talk about. So if it's somebody that has experience in VAT, for example, then they will share the experience of being out in the jungle on patrol. If it is somebody that is a sailor, they will share the experience of what it's been like to be a sailor from the 60s to now or whenever they were operating. Okay. And these are things that provide you the groundwork for actually doing a purpose built recording towards establishing more documentation, more information, more investment in the stories that you're interested in the area or the town or the business or the occupation that you want to know more about. Having these additional stories helps to simply generate more interest for yourself. So just taking it as sound is one way of doing it, and having sounds and podcasts and editing it to be related to what you're dealing with is one way of making it not just for yourself or for your own archiving, but for distribution purposes, to have an audience to share with people and help to generate more knowledge and more awareness and more emotional involvement in the stories that are important to you. So sometimes you can use visuals. Like you can use photo albums to actually spark stories with people. Tell me about this one, and then have that as a running monologue to go with with the photo album. Um, the addition of sound effects. You have the option of of actually creating sound effects. There's lots of advice online for how you can do it yourself. There's also places you could download it from. The addition of the sound effects of the stories are kind of like the embellishment or stickers that you put on to your Instagram photos. It's a way of creating a little extra oomph to the moment, okay? And to help to also bring in a little extra feeling towards what's being said. Reenactment of the situation is another way. Perhaps the quality of the recording is something you don't want to repeat. You can also you can also reenact or have people reenact for you the situation that's occurred. Okay. Or overlay it as animation. There's tons and tons of YouTube videos that go through these types of situations. You can see it on History Channel. Many documentaries actually use these visuals as a way of providing a visual impact to go with the stories that are being told. Okay. Now, what I'm going to play for you next is actually assignments by my current radio broadcasting class. The first assignment that we have, the first lecture that we have is history of radio. So I forced them to go and talk to their grandparents and their parents and say, like, what was the first experience you had? Some individuals didn't have experience a radio until they were in their 30s or 40s. Others remember being children and the first time it came up. Okay. And some people don't remember the first sound that they heard from a radio, but they do remember the emotional impact that radio brought into their lives. So there's two different ways that these students have chosen to tell those stories. One is through a verbal reenactment, and the other one is through a direct interview with the subject.
Hi guys, welcome to Sammy Chong podcast. I'm here with my mom, Melinda Chong. So, mom, can you share your most memorable experience you had as a kid when listening to radio?
I remember when I was young, my grandmother and I used to tune into a radio program. I think it's called Dear Mr. Lonely.
Is it like nowadays TV drama?
Yeah, something like that. There will be played to main songs, Mr. Lonely in the background, while the narrator narrate the story plot, and then the voice actors will speak the roles. Also, there are some sound effects like you can hear their footsteps or the plates when they are eating and so on.
I was wondering, can you actually focus to the story plot with only listening?
What I did is just I close my eyes and imagine the scenario. It helps me to connect my emotions to the characters.
What kind of emotions?
Like there are times I actually cried because the story are based on real life.
I see. I didn't know radio was that interesting back then. I think that's all for today's podcast session, and thank you once again, Mom, for sharing this to us. Goodbye.
Okay. So the other one is actually where, because like the assignment had to be handed in English, she wasn't able to use her grandmother as the example because she primarily spoke a Chinese dialect. But she still was able to maintain the emotional impact of the story uh, by uh, by repeating it.
Recently, I had a quick chat with my grandma, who was born in 1953. I said, "Hey, Grandma,
A little bit
do you
soft,
remember
Anthony.
your first
Sorry,
introduction towards radio?"
It's a little bit soft. Can you increase the volume a little bit? Yes.
bringing
His
it up.
grandpa was persuading
Thank
me.
you.
He did something that made me feel very romantic. He sent a love letter to the radio station, and the DJ read out the letter in the radio show. I stopped the conversations while seeing the tears that come out from my grandma's beautiful eyes.
Okay. So family impactful story, like without the potentially without the radio drama, without the radio dedication, like this particular interviewee would never have been born because grandma's not going to be impressed by grandpa without this like special like little acknowledgement there. So this is these are the types of stories that you want to actually capture because it helps to not only explain where you came from, but also helps to humanize the people that are telling the stories. We have a tendency to only see our parents or grandparents in the role that we are culturally assigned to. But in fact, these are human beings that at one point had views and actions very similar to yours, had desires similar to yours. So this is a great way to kind of get in touch with that and understand where they came from.
Hi, guys. Welcome.
Okay, there we go. So here's another example of a usage of using a direct type of recording to a directed recording to actually get information from somebody that had experienced an aspect of history. This is a part of a documentary that we created for regarding the new villages and the Briggs Plan.
他们强迫我们一定要搬来新村，你不要搬来新村的话，他就来抓你，还要自己来建房屋。政府只是分配一块土地是24×40，给你去盖一个简陋的房屋来住。这些柴我们还要自己去买，而且是我们把38的旧屋把它撤掉，拿个材料搬来。那个时候，所有的房子里面没有拉水的厕所，通通是用人工来找的。 倒到巴黎去，厕所是坐在屋子外面，那个大便是排在这个桶里面，是非常不卫生的，非常臭。所有吃的饭都要在这个公众的那边去打的，这个是在紧急法令里面吃这个大锅饭。在那个紧急法令下呀，新村的人民呢，每天出去工作都不能够带东西的。 只能够带水，为了要杜绝马共的粮食。早上出去，下午就要回来，晚上就是戒严。所以那个时候，我们华人非常的艰苦。
Okay, there we go. Now, there's more to like being able to capture history and culture than even just taking like direct experiential stories from people that were there. There is also the aspect that we talked about with evolution of culture. And when you have an environment like Malaysia, which is this incredible combination of different influences, then it really provides a lot of opportunity for unique characteristics between different groups to flourish and be definable. But Sometimes what happens is that you lose, in order to kind of blend in with the larger aspects of society, certain things get lost. In the US, for example, there was a time frame where we had a lot of different dialects. So like somebody from Brooklyn sounded different than from somebody from Bronx, sounded different from somebody from Manhattan. Similar for Chinese dialects, which actually incorporate different language structures and pronunciations. So there have been a couple of initiatives in the last year that worked with UTAR. One of them is our media and creative studies students did Walau Dialects Le, which was meant to celebrate the different Chinese dialects that exist in Malaysia. We also had working with 988 FM on the examination of and the preservation of dialects as well, that was conducted by our broadcasting journalism class in October 2020. Okay, so being able to help practice these forms also is a way of helping to bring this aspect of culture forward in the evolution of the overall culture. Now, fusion is a little more controversial because it does provide a means of connecting with the past and with somebody's culture, but updating it and combining it with other things that are part of the interest and psyche of the listener. Some examples of existing fusion, like we had Tintoy earlier with his examples with Wayang Kulit, but there's other examples that are outside as well. So there is Hallucination from Canada, which incorporates traditional Native American styles into electronic dance music. The who take Mongolian throat singing and traditional instruments and infuse them into heavy metal, okay? And then more locally, we have certain examples from Sarawak showing traditional dances and dress. And we also have different gamelan troops. In this case, one that my son was part of, and some of the audience members were also part of, that was able to combine new aspects or to actually create new forms with gamelan. So one of them is a transcoding of Rebecca Black's Friday song from 2012 to the gamelan setting. Okay. So my apologies to Mrs. Zadi. I think I'm going to overrun my mark by a couple of minutes, but I'll try to get close to on time. Okay. Good. So this is an example of like gamelan doesn't necessarily need to be in classical form. Actually, one of the members of this gamelan course actually developed a developed a new song along the lines of traditional gamelan technique. Okay, so now in the act of recording and creating new things, there always is a certain element of risk. When you are dealing with recordings especially, certain things are going to be a little more difficult to deal with. Personal trauma is something that's going to come up a lot in certain stories, and like having to push through that and do a recording isn't always going to be advisable. Sometimes you have to respect what a person's not willing to talk about. Cultural taboos. When I had my first internship with the local community access station, one of the tasks they put me on was to go and record the local African storyteller. And when I got there, he made it clear in no uncertain terms I was never to record any of his stories because it is part of the cultural tradition that they are passed down verbally, that there's nothing written, there's nothing recorded. TV is a form of recording. You don't get to record my stories. So I had to respect that and back away. Privacy and disclosure are things to consider too. Depending on your position with a person, they may feel a certain amount of trust towards you, in which case they may feel free, they may forget that things are being recorded that can be repeated where other people can hear. There are some things where, for example, you don't want to repeat what's been said, okay? So having those sensitivities in mind is one thing. Now, looking at a more broader scale, like what is the difference between two words that we've heard before, appropriation versus adaptation? Adaptation is an example of fusion, for example, that brings in a certain aspect of your culture and combines it with other cultural or artistic forms. But appropriation is seen as the stealing from a group. And usually it's seen as by the dominant group taking from a smaller community, from a weaker community, okay? Which is why, for example, the one that I've used here, the Chipao, or the Chom Sing, as I'm more familiar with it. The team that wore that was most likely thinking this is just something really pretty, but Asian Americans had issue with this because it showed an appropriation of their culture. Whereas if you look at the mainland Chinese or the Taiwanese, they're going to be looking at it and thinking, well, that's interesting, because most of them felt that like it was just interesting. It's like, oh, nice. So she's like found our dress and is wearing it. It's cool. So there is going to be a difference in that perspective that you're always going to want to be aware of. So it's not necessarily appropriate for myself as somebody from the outside to take an aspect of somebody else's culture and recycle that into something that I'm creating, even if it is new. Another American example, the woman with the guitar at the bottom of the picture is Sister Rosetta Sister Rosetta Tharpe. And she's actually like the godmother of rock and roll. She's one of the most influential people that's led to the development of Elvis and the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and every other rock and roll band you've ever heard of, because she was the one that actually developed the form for the guitar, the singer, the bass, and the drums as being the core of any rock and roll band. But rock and roll is a white appropriation of African American rhythm and blues. And because of that, it's a example of where part of that cultural shift takes place, where it's not always fair to part of the individual or to the group that's had their stuff adapted. So it's a cultural sensitivity. Where's the line at? There isn't really a firm line, but it is something to be aware of in art, that there's going to occasionally be resistance, and sometimes that resistance is justified, and those sensitivities should be considered. So, which kind of leads into the conversation of ethics, okay? When you're doing recording, make sure that you've informed consent, that they know that they're being recorded. Don't surprise people. Avoid making promises you can't keep. Like if they say, well, I'll tell you this, but don't record it, stop recording. Like, consider the different kinds of information that will come from your recordings. Again, think about who else is going to be hearing this. And don't misrepresent what's been said. Okay, don't edit the part where they say, I hate this person, but I also respect them, and then just leave it as, I hate this person. Okay, that type of manipulation is disingenuous and can be harmful. So the ethics of what you're doing is not just common sense, but is also something to keep in mind because it's easy to forget in the heat of the moment. Now, for the technical execution part, again, the hand phone is pretty good for close range recording. It's not the best. Usually, like when you have access to the equipment, of course, you want to use it. And there's specialized equipment that helps with different environments, okay? Having a cardioid mic or a hypercardioid mic is going to help cut down on noise level, okay? It's going to be better to have a omnidirectional mic if you're in a quiet environment where you want to capture some of the actual environment you're in, like a library or a cafe, and actually get a feeling for what the person's talking about. So if you have access to different types of microphones and equipment, then using them for the appropriate situation is going to be best. If you're intending to do something as a form of art, then actually practicing with better equipment and technical equipment is going to be helpful. But if you're going to be doing straight opportunity recordings, the phone is fine, just being aware of what we call the signal to noise ratio. If you're in a noisy environment, it's going to be harder to hear what you're trying to record. And there's ways of controlling that. You don't have to necessarily be a slave to your environment if you have the option of making changes. So in the picture here, it's one of the assignments that my digital audio production students do, which is to create acoustic panels. We have several labs that are lined with these actually, because the labs are made out of concrete and echo terribly. So in order to keep them, in order to make them more audible, we have them actually demonstrate these panels and the improvement in how the rooms sound when they're put up. These are cheap and easy to make. You can even make them for free out of egg cartons and available poster board.
Anthony, you have a couple of minutes left.
Okay, I do this one fast. So I just, this is the same recording that I gave you earlier. Now, if you compare that to the other one, it's much quieter. The original one I gave you was, the original one that I gave you was actually after I'd done some cleanup on it. There are softwares that are available online, and again, for free, that will allow you to do things such as what's called noise reduction, okay? This is Audacity, which is a software that me and my son both use, and it's quite effective for doing noise reduction using small amounts of sample. It's also good for bringing down certain frequencies of sound. Sounds composed of, the sounds we hear are composed of multiple different frequencies. When you identify the ones that are covering the capture that you actually want, then you're able to actually remove the offending frequencies and reduce the amount of noise, making the voice stand out more and be more clear, okay? So after the talk, I'm going to put a bunch of links into the chat so that you guys can actually refer to the software as well as those additional links that I told you about with the WHO and the other things. Okay. So yes, sorry, I'm done now.
Okay, cool. All right, so we do initially have a question from the audience, and then the attendees actually dropped the question, but I think this is still important regardless. So we're talking about storytelling. So we have sound, we have score, we have background music, you know, Foley, ambience, and things like that. In a effective storytelling, would you say that, music will also help in the narration, the narrative of the story, or just natural sound is the most important?
Well, okay, so like actually, I always go to war with my students about this one because so many of them want to add the music as like the thing, and the thing is like I have to tell them like we are the faculty of creative industries, not the faculty of copy and paste industries. So effectively, if you're bringing in music, you're trying to take the emotional impact somebody else has created and put it into your own thing. And like from a teacher student point of view, that's not cool for me to allow to happen because I am trying to teach them how to create that feeling. I want them to be able to create the feeling, not to copy somebody else's feeling that they've created. So using the sounds and audio that they get and finding ways of making it have the appropriate either like touching feeling or creepy feeling or whichever feeling you're going for without relying on the crutch of music is going to be one thing. Now, as a completed project, or if you are a musician yourself, then I highly recommend it because then you have the emotional impact that is going to help drive the point home further. And if it's your own music and you're combining it with these stories, there is a lot of power that comes from that. Okay. But ethically and in terms of copyright, if you're going to do music, you have to be very careful, especially if you're going to put the stuff on YouTube, because YouTube will just take your stuff off because like you played out 3 seconds of something that's owned by Warner Music. So my first advice, especially when you're starting out, is don't rely on the music. Practice making your stuff emotionally impactful without relying on the work of others first. And then you can find new ways of incorporating and find ways that other people will effectively want to incorporate your stuff into theirs. That should be your goal.
Okay. That's cool. Again, almost similar things that I would approach and don't abuse music is something that I will also tell my students. Use whatever they have. Okay, we have other question now coming in from Anonymous. What do you think is the optimum length of an audio interview, bearing in mind the attention span and other focus facts you gave before? Yeah.
Okay, a lot of it's going to depend on who you're interviewing and who your audience is. For shorter attention spans, like you're going to want to take the good parts and kind of extract and put them together into a shorter, more fast-paced type of situation. For somebody that's looking for more detail, has more maturity or more interest in the actual the actual details of the event or the actual step-by-step of an event, then you can go ahead and take a little more time to put it in. When it comes to editing, there's no problem with taking out, for example, stuttering, okay? Like anybody that's recording my stuff, it's gonna find a few points where they can actually chop out some of what I've been saying because I'm not actually delivering information at that point. But that'll make it quicker and make it easier to listen to as well on the second or third time.
Okay, there's another one that's somewhat similar to the first one about musical, especially composed classical music from Edwin Tan. Then does having a background in classical music add in incorporating the right music, the appropriate key for invoking the right emotion and diegetic sound, especially in a rhythmic ways?
It's a really good question. Okay, so from my perspective, I think I should probably come very clear on this. I have zero musical background. I learned how to play harmonica about 20 years ago, and that was about it. And like whenever I sing, my whole family immediately clears the room. So in terms of having a musical skill on my behalf, I have none. But what I am able to do is to define rhythm and timing because of my own background in dealing with editing and video. And those two are very closely entwined. There's a lot of, for example, like montages that use musical timing as a means of cutting scene to scene. So that incorporation is one thing to keep in mind. If you do have a musical background, that's fantastic, because there's a lot of the emotional impacts that you should be able to actually synthesize. I'm sorry, I always mangle this word, synthesize from one point, from like hearing to seeing, or hearing to feeling, or tasting even, being able to create that in a new manner. So having the skill in doing that actually is very useful in a lot of other places. If you happen to be like me and not have it, then you have to work it the other way. It also helps to have people you can work with. I'm able to work with many of my colleagues who do have very strong skills in audio, in music. And because of that, I'm able to get input from them. So collaboration and partnering, I would say, is also important. You don't have to be a one-man show on anything.
Okay, we have like maybe one more question. I think Claire raised her hand just now.
Yeah, a very quick question.
Yeah.
Anthony,
Sure.
just now you were recommending that we record our cultural environment, which I think is really interesting because, you know, my mom used to tell us stories about where our great grandparents came from. However,
Great.
you know, what would you recommend? Where would you recommend we store these sounds, yeah, for posterity purposes? You know,
Okay.
you know, like photographs, you know, you print it and then you keep it in a box, but sound is a bit different.
You're right. Sound does make it. What I found is that, like, just like with photographs, it's a really good analogy, because like you take pictures, you save them. I've got like thumb drives full of pictures that that I lose track of, and then I find later on when I'm trying to find like my tax receipts and stuff like that. You know, so in terms of cataloging is one thing. Like, do you want to actually have some dedicated thumb drives to keep stuff in and know that that's what they're about? Are you that dedicated to your project, for example? The other question I would have is, like, what do you intend to do with it? Do you intend to actually edit them together? So if that's going to be the case, then like if you're going to do that, then you have a filing system in place that keeps everything together so that you're able to extract it, do the editing, put it together into your finished product. But I think most people really just want to have it as a means of preserving that connection with their loved ones in their past. Like the ones that I'm keeping for my father-in-law, for example, are going to have a lot of value to my wife and kids like 10, 15 years from now. So that'll be the type of thing where you want to like have it available, like kind of remember where it's at, maybe even put the thumb drive with your photo albums so that you can listen to it and find the pictures that he was talking about when he was pointing them out.
Okay, we're actually going to overrun. Thank you so much, everyone, for the.
I'm so sorry.
Thank you, Anthony, for that great information and also sharing, especially about the family history and thing whatnot. So for all of you who have tons of questions at the end of the session, please leave a comment maybe in the chat. So Anthony is going to be online and can answer the question for you. So thank you so much, Anthony, for your time and your really amazing thoughts about sharing history with sounds. Okay, so that's all for our session. Up next, we're gonna have a session with Zamzura Zahari with Simon on the lead for that session. So that's all from me. Thank you so much for joining us.